Due Process, awarded 9 Emmys, including the 2005 New York Emmy for Outstanding Crime Reporting Programming.
Perform the duties of the public advocate
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
He's picking up a department that was dropped from state government 12 years ago. A law school dean and civil rights lawyer turned New Jersey's public advocate. Ron Chen in his first sit-down TV talk. Up next on Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy. Additional funding provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual and online legal reference, elaw.com.
It was launched more than 3 decades ago and killed 22 years later. But New Jersey's public advocate is now back, and in a big way. I'm Raymond Brown.
And I'm Sandy King, and on this edition of Due Process, we meet the law school dean who's been charged with reviving an office that's been dead for a dozen years. Ron Chen, welcome. You are new to state government, but not new to us here at Due Process. And let me start with the obvious question. Here we are in this time of massive budget gap, leaner, meaner state government, we're told, has to come. And yet here we're bringing back another department, another layer of bureaucracy at a cost of $19 million?
Well, I certainly hope that in the end we're able to show that the Department of the Public Advocate is a value proposition for the people of the state of New Jersey. They have so many needs for having a voice where they haven't had a voice, an effective voice recently, be it for utility rates, through rate council, advocacy for the elderly, advocacy for children. I think in the end, the Department of the Public Advocate, we certainly hope to show, will be a benefit to the people of New Jersey.
The needs you talk about, I think, are understood. We're going to explore them more. 19 million seems to me a drop in the bucket. We'll talk about that more. But before we get to all of that, a brief historical analysis. Why then, given the need structure in New Jersey, which hasn't changed that much in the last few years, was the public advocate eliminated? I mean, fiscal restraint is the issue that's been suggested. That's the mantra. But what really was the reason?
Well, of course, you can ask many people who were actors at the time of what it really was. You'll get a variety of answers. There was probably a political confluence that suggested that the Department of the Public Advocate had, perhaps, according to some people, done its job too well and advocated in areas that did not cause convenience to some in state government at the time. And therefore, for that reason, I really have to applaud the legislature and Governor Cody for having the resilience, the political resilience to bring the department back when a lot of people are saying those 12 years were sorely missed.
And yet, Ron, you said in your confirmation hearing that the public advocate should not, quote, simply jump right back into the same litigation and issues that the old department was involved in. There is some implicit criticism there of the way things were as opposed to the way you'd like to do them. What does that mean?
No, I certainly didn't mean to imply any criticism, but only to say that the issues that were relevant for the department to get involved in 20 years ago may not necessarily be the same issues today.
Are there one or two that you can identify that you know, this is not what we're going to deal with now, we're going to go in that direction instead?
Well, right now we're trying to plan out what the priorities for the department are. We've already done a few things that hopefully address the needs of and concerns of the people of New Jersey today. The prior issues, who's to say? I can't say right now whether the department will get involved back into them, whether it be affordable housing or school desegregation. Those are still important issues, but also in 20 years there have been new ways to address those issues. So it's too early to tell yet whether there's any need for the public advocate to get back in.
Let me go back then to the answer, which I actually like. Not that what I like is relevant. We try to be impartial. But I liked your saying that there obviously were political pressures that were among the causes of the demise of the public advocate. But it brings us to how you're going to handle the office. Presumably, if you do your job and speak for the voiceless, those pressures are going to mount again. What is it that's going to make this go round different in terms of your presumed willingness to challenge the powerful on behalf of the voiceless and the response that we can anticipate because the world hasn't changed?
Well, I think the fact that the department is back may show that those in state government public officials are willing and in fact in my talks with the governor welcome the fact that there's going to be someone there sort of as we're kicking the tires, making sure that government is functioning effectively and responsively to the people. And if with that new mindset, I'm sure the new department will flourish. I plan to do exactly what you just said, to be an independent voice, to speak out when I think it's necessary. And I think and I hope that right now our current climate will welcome that type of independent voice.
And yet, when you take a job in a governor's cabinet, isn't a certain amount of political savvy necessary? And I'm wondering if we started to see a little bit of that, Ron, again in the confirmation hearing, when you went out of your way to tell the committee that when you fought against Megan's Law, that you did so not because of any great feeling on your own part, but because Judge Bissell had called on you to take that role. Was that a political move on your part, and did you really not have public policy and constitutional objections to Megan's Law?
Well, clearly I did, and I do not back away from any of the work I did in challenging Megan's Law now more than 10 years ago. But I think there is a difference in principle between being a private advocate, advocating for a cause, as a member of the bar, as lawyers have a duty to do, to take on unpopular causes, and someone who is in effect representing the public, as opposed to a private client. There are different considerations that come into play in determining how to use the public resources to be most effective. So I'm going to be looking for speaking out or looking into those issues that are going to have the broadest impact on the most number of people.
But you knew that that was one of the things that made you controversial in the Senate.
Sure, and actually, in all humility, I'm still very proud of the advocacy that I engaged in when I was in private practice. That was a very challenging and very rewarding part of my career. Now I have a new job and a new client. And I hopefully it'll be equally challenging and equally rewarding.
Is there a component of your job that requires some political sophistication?
Well, I suppose yes. Even though obviously I'm not a politician. Have no desire to be. You
anticipated my follow-up question, which is when we spoke to LimaFarber, for example, we asked her the same question, sort of contrasting her with her predecessor Peter Harvey, who clearly had no real political background, hands-on. In that sense, you resemble Peter. You've been a lawyer and an academic all your life. How do you come into a job that requires some political sophistication without the background of doing political maneuver, quite frankly, and effectively relaunch a controversial department?
Well, I like to think, even though I've not been a politician, that I'm not without political, with a small p, skills. Part of what I have to do, I completely understand, is get to know Trenton, get to know how these processes work. I mean, as a citizen, as a lawyer, as a law professor, I've certainly watched state government at work, but not with the intensity and not up close as I am today. So there is obviously a bit of a learning curve for anyone who's new to state government. I think that's part of what I'm told the governor wanted in a public advocate, someone who is could bring a fresh perspective and independent view.
Still on your background, you've been, as you say, a professor, a dean, a civil rights lawyer, a national board member of the ACLU. Do you see a conflict that is almost bound to arise between who you were and who you are, between old friends and new responsibilities?
I don't think so. I mean, I enjoyed very much my work at the ACLU. Of course, now I've resigned all my offices with the ACLU in order to take this job. It gave me a perspective, which is, I think, very relevant to the job I have, of trying to advocate for those who do not have a voice, and for whatever reason, due to economic disadvantage, social or cultural disadvantage, or whatever reason. My prior experience, I think, has taught me a lot about the problems I'm going to have to address, and therefore I think it's a plus.
Let me ask you about an area that's likely to engender some controversy. Within your office, there'll be an ombudsman whose job it is to look at the questions of civil liberties that may be affected by New Jersey policy with respect to homeland security and terrorism. What do you see that office doing, and what do you think is likely to be an area where there's going to be some tough judgments made in that framework?
Well, I note, of course, that ombudsman role exists precisely because Governor Corzine insisted that while trying to protect homeland security and safety of New Jerseyans, which everyone wants, that there be a respect and adherence to the civil liberties that define us as a nation.
Do you have any particular areas of concern that you're already looking at, even if you're not ready to announce a full-blown policy initiative?
We haven't identified anything yet, but those issues, I think, will inevitably come. Actually, I heard today, for instance, that the Board of Public Utilities has received a complaint from the ACLU, from my former colleagues, that I had nothing to do with it, about Verizon giving over the phone records to the National Security Agency. It's too early to tell. I don't know how the BP will react, but issues like that.
But you would look at that, and potentially your department might look at it and even take a position on that issue if you thought it was germane. That's the kind of thing you'll look at.
It's certainly very possible.
You said that your first initiative, though, would be an examination of the use of eminent domain for private development. What makes that the critical first point for you?
Well, it represents such, I think, a confluence of issues that are very important in New Jersey. Housing is obviously a very important issue. The process of redevelopment is, for better or worse, a very important part of our economy. Yet, on the other hand, we have a lot of concerns, very understandable concerns about citizens, about the power of government to take their homes and essentially appear to give it to someone else for private economic gain. And certainly the Supreme Court case 2 years ago in Kelo focused public attention on it. But in New Jersey, it's been an important issue that I think deserved some attention for a number of years. And I was glad last week we, in fact, issued our first report on the use of eminent domain. And I look forward to working with the legislature and trying to craft some reforms to the process that makes it fairer and more transparent.
As we look at the intersection of policy and politics, former Governor Cody was clearly a key player in bringing about this office. It's no secret that mental health has been an area of concern to him. Does that suggest to you that a politically savvy use of your office would be to look closely at mental health issues, because a powerful political figure who is one of the midwives of your office thinks that's an important policy question?
Well, whether it's politically savvy or not, I think it's important to do. The welfare of those who suffer from mental illness is a very key issue, and I applaud Governor Cody for drawing more public attention to it. And one of the divisions in the department is the Division of Mental Health Advocacy. And
have you established priorities yet within that division as to how you're going to go about attacking mental health questions?
Actually, right now, our main priorities in the department in recreating it is staffing it, filling it with people who I think will be able to carry out those missions.
Is $19 million enough?
In these budgetary times, I'm not complaining. $19 million, by the way, is the total budget, including those parts of state government that were existing while the department had been abolished and are coming back in. It's actually the new functions of the department's $5.2 million.
But your department says it exists. Look on your website, it says very clearly, we exist to give voice to the powerless, the mentally ill, the elderly, children. I know you're new in the job, but in the area of the elderly and children, As you come into this, is there an area that you say, gee, this is really where I'd like to make an impact? That's a public policy that I want to address.
And that's what we're doing now. We're trying to formulate what our priorities are. Our first function, and I've been doing this for the past few weeks since I took office, which is meeting with the constituent groups in those areas. We're meeting a lot. For instance, advocacy for the developmentally disabled is another one of our areas, an area that needs, in my opinion, from what I've learned in the past 2 months, it needs a lot of attention and has suffered, frankly, from a lot of neglect from public institutions. And they have a variety of problems. So we were going to be setting priorities in that way, trying to, for instance, address the issues of over-institutionalization of those who have a developmental disability. And for the elderly, obviously, issues that can come up, access to health care. Housing is an issue for the elderly, especially. We haven't set out a specific agenda yet, but that's my first priority, to make sure that all the areas, constituencies that have been charged to my special care to receive advocacy get that.
You've already jumped into one critical area that your office will cover, and that is utilities. So talk about why and... Well,
the Rate Council, the Ratepayer Advocate, as it was known previously, obviously has the function, the availability of energy and water to citizens is obviously it's a bread and butter issue for all of us. We did take a position a few weeks ago about the proposed merger of Exelon and PSE&G, and expressed concerns and in fact opposed the merger as it's currently constituted because we thought that there was the danger of detriment to ratepayers, particularly with regard to the market share and the possibility of increased utility rates.
Let me ask you a question that I'm sure New Jersey citizens who weren't familiar with the public advocate might ask. Do you have the authority to publicly criticize or litigate against other divisions of state government if you disagree with policies, assuming you can get standing and go overcome the legal hurdles?
That is one of the unique tools that the department is given to initiate proceedings, including against other arms of government, state or local government. It was, I acknowledge, probably one of the more controversial tools, and one which I have said I would use as a last resort. We will try every non-adversarial means to see if we can address a problem and if we can arrive at a consensus. The other members of the cabinet are my colleagues as well, and I have every hope and expectation that if an issue arises with any one of them, that we will work with them and try to arrive at a result. On the other hand, they're all professionals, and they may realize that there may be some instances in which there's simply a disagreement that cannot be resolved that way, in which that power may have to be exercised. I'm certainly not predicting that I'm going to be suing other state agencies frequently, but it is a tool the legislature saw fit to give us, and when I need to use it, I'll use it.
But this desire for consensus and a non-adversarial approach, you see that as going beyond just your interaction with other state agencies, all right? And isn't that a little odd when, if you are in fact to be the voice and the arm of the powerless, isn't it that very threat of litigation that makes that happen, and the litigation itself?
Well, I think there are many forms of advocacy, and my prior experience, yes, I have brought litigation, but in my role as administrator and law professor, obviously a sort of microcosm institution of a law school, I learned that very often you're much more effective for everyone around if you can find a means of advocacy that does not necessarily result in an adversarial proceeding. Again, I'm not ruling anything out.
But isn't litigation the big stick? I mean, whether it's a public sector group or a private corporation or some other entity, ultimately your clout is the ability to litigate and perhaps you think win.
Sure.
And their willingness to talk to you has got to be based on their perception that they'd rather talk than face you in court. What other weapon do you really have?
Well, yes, I've got the public bully pulpit to the extent people pay attention to it. Yes, of course, litigation in the end is the ultimate tool that I have. And with that confidently in mind, I think that there can be a lot of issues, as is true in litigation generally, that can be resolved amicably, especially with another branch of state government. It's not quite like a piece of private litigation, which is purely adversarial. You are working with other state officials or government officials who presumably also have the public interest in mind, and so I don't think it will dilute the effectiveness of my department at all to first see if we can arrive at a non-adversarial way to resolve a problem. And we've got one entire department, the Office of Dispute Resolution, that is designed to see if those methods are effective. And more to the point, for the public, there are often situations, recurring situations, in which it may be more helpful for the department to provide a non-adversarial way to resolve.
You must have an
disputes.
example. I see the sparkle in your eye. You must have an example in mind.
Well, issues regarding quality of housing. I'm just going to hypothesize for a moment. There can be some types of issues that come up again and again, in which, yes, rather than having the department intervene in individual litigation time and time again, it might be more efficient for us to give, let's say, the elderly a cheap, inexpensive means of challenging their HMO. And again, this is a hypothetical right now. So they can sit down and challenge the way their HMO is interpreting their access to health care.
You're advocating systemic solutions, either through legislation or other kinds of agreements.
Well, it could be systemic solutions, as we're attempting to do now with eminent domain, or it could be simply providing a device in which citizens who have a recurring problem have effective means to a dispute resolution mechanism that does not involve them going out and hiring an expensive lawyer, which we all know many people simply cannot afford. And since it's probably not practical for the Department of the Public Advocate to represent a whole large number of citizens individually, simply because we don't have the resources, even 19 million actually simply does not permit for us to be a general legal services organization. We may be, in certain circumstances, doing more help for those citizens if we give them a way to bring their grievances in a way that they can get effective relief.
You had 5 predecessors as public advocate, all of them, I think, your friends or colleagues. Is there, do you think, in looking at how you want to do this non-adversarial, non-confrontational, non-litigation approach, without any criticism implied, but is that, in fact, do you think, a mistake that maybe was made in the earlier public advocate offices, that they were too litigious?
Well, I'm certainly, given that we're talking 20 years ago in a time and place that I certainly wasn't privy to, I'm certainly not criticized.
But as you pointed out earlier, there was hostility to the public advocate.
You know, in hindsight, one could always say, did you really need to bring that lawsuit? And there's no point in me, as you say, they're all my trusted mentors, from Stanley Van Ness, the first one, to LimaFarber, who I look forward to working with as my colleague now that she's the Attorney General. And they each had their own style. And therefore, I'm not going to go back and say 25 years ago you didn't do it right, but I think right now what is called for is a good mixture and balance between the traditional methods of the public advocate litigation, which is still there, and I'm certainly not foreclosing resort to it, and alternative means of dispute resolution.
Ron, as we start to run out of time, let me ask you about another of your mentors, Arthur Kanoy. A dear friend of all of ours, but not somebody who one could have pictured taking a job in state government. Were he advising you, were he here to advise you now, what do you think he would tell you to do?
Oh, that raises such an image with me. Yes, Arthur, who left us a few years ago, he was a fighter, and I think he would be the first one to describe it that way. But you know, Arthur was also one who knew when to fight and when to talk. And actually, having worked with him so many years, he might be the first one, at least, to say to me quietly, this is the time you negotiate and this is the time that you bring a
And
lawsuit.
let me just add, Arthur was a beloved professor of constitutional law and very active in the public sphere and describes himself as a revolutionary as well. We're going to have to resume this conversation at another time, but we look forward to having you back for a progress report once you've been on the job for a while. Our thanks to you as a public advocate and to you for watching, but come back and see us next week for serious scrutiny of law and justice. Till then, for Sandy King and all of us here at Due Process, I'm Raymond Brown.
Committee heard from Corzine's public advocate nominee, Ron Chen. That department was abolished in 1995. Governor Cody signed the bill recreating it, and Corzine selected Chen, who promised to bring a 21st century perspective to the job.
I do not think that the new Department of the Public Advocate should simply jump right back into the same litigation and issues that the old department was involved in. We need to take a thorough and objective look at all the issues as they exist today.
Impartially and justly
perform the duties of the public advocate
perform the duties of the public advocate
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
So help me God.
So help me God.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the New Jersey State Bar Foundation, committed to educating the public about the law, and by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy. Additional funding provided by Lawyer's Diary and Manual and online legal reference, elaw.com.